Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Keenan Weller. I will be your host and moderator for today's sessions. I'm just giving a few more seconds for latecomers to arrive. I want to acknowledge that I myself at this virtual conference am coming to you from Ottawa on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial, and a special thanks to that community. As an avid kayaker and camper, I appreciate their defense of our watershed and wanted to acknowledge that today. My name is Keenan Weller, and it's an honor to serve as the host for today's panel. Like the rest of our panel, my full biography is on the conference website, so I'm not going to read through those. Instead, you get a custom version that is being tailored to my personal whims. In my case, this means I want you to know that although I've been with Live Work Play since 1995, when it was just an idea on a Macintosh Classic 2, never in my wildest dreams did I imagine I'd be hosting a panel on this topic, or that well over 100 people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons would be working as federal public servants in 2021. But here we are. So on to the important people, our panelists. Rosemary Rivard is a pioneer in the Live Work Play partnership with the Federal Public Service. I don't want to go into a lot of detail about that because the story of how that came about is part of the reason she's on the panel. So I'll just say she's currently working with Innovation Science and Economic Development Canada, and that she has an enviable range of talents. She can do anything from administration to graphic design, and she's a great help to completely destroying negative stereotypes about disability and employment. Sometimes we just say these things as an exaggerated compliment, but it's a fact that when we submitted Mary Gacella's biography to the conference organizers, we had to first cut her most significant accomplishments in half and then pare down from there. And we only had room for a couple of awards. So I will keep it short here. Mary retired as Chief Commissioner of the Canadian Human Rights Commission, following a highly distinguished public service career of 36 years. Most important of all, she is a founding member and current chair of the Live Work Play Federal Employment Strategy Group. My colleague Anna Nelson is the Live Work Play Director of Employment Supports, which sounds like a sweet corner office job with a lot of coffee breaks, but in reality, she helps lead a team of 7 supporting some 200 job seekers and workers with intellectual disabilities, delivers workshops, hosts meetings, chairs networks, reports to our funder, represents at conferences, and is also on call for medical emergencies for people we support on evenings and weekends. So just to complete the picture, she does all this from a home office in Thunder Bay, and sometimes while hiking the Sleeping Giant Trail. Last but not least, Elizabeth Desjardins is an Ottawa-born public servant, 17 years, not an unusual story in itself, but she finds herself here today because of her passion for facilitating diverse recruitment practices. This type of ground-up design thinking by Elizabeth and other committed HR professionals in the Federal Public Service is at the heart of the development and success of the Live Work Play Employment Supports model. She has been with Innovative Recruitment and Assessment Team at ISED for the past 3 years and is part of a team that is truly delivering on their mission. Okay, so I'm going to get started with our questions for today's panel. Just to let you know that we may have time for some Q&A at the end of the planned questions, but if not, there is a networking session that immediately follows. And so I've told that's basically an opportunity to carry on the conversation, whether it's about the panel topic or anything else you'd like to discuss. Okay, so let's see if we can bring Anna on screen and we'll get started with her. Okay, for Anna, what is the history of Live Work Play and its involvement in employment for people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons?
Great, thanks, Keenan. And hi, everybody. So Live Work Play has a very long history, but if I were to look back, mainly focusing on the past 8 years, it is about then that we really started to take a social capital approach, meaning developing networks of people, including volunteers, champions, staff, family members, etc., to help us establish relationships with potential employers and develop employment positions for people we support, job seekers. In particular, we developed an employment task force made up of volunteers who started meeting on a regular basis to talk about some of the current job seekers and their interests and skills, and then use their networks to look at hiring people. The focus was and is still on taking the time to get to know both job seekers and employers and match the needs of employers with talents, skills, and interests of the job seeker. We saw tremendous success with this model and continue to do that as well. We really stopped using more traditional employment readiness assessments and decided that if people said they wanted to work, that was enough. And we'd focus on getting to know them as a person. Too many people waste time trying to predict what people will be good at based on filling out a questionnaire or some kind of assessment that doesn't really look at what their skills and gifts are. And instead of getting to know them and seeing their skills, gifts, and talents in action. So instead, we really look at a holistic way of getting to know people and finding out who they are and how they learn those kinds of things. This means getting out to see them in their home, in the community, sometimes at a job or a volunteer job or at school. This, of course, has changed a little bit with COVID, but we're still creative and get to know people the best way that we can in a really authentic way. We also decided to challenge the long-held assumption that people with intellectual disabilities could not succeed in office environments. And over the years, they have helped disprove that myth in spectacular fashion, as the stats and individual stories now show us. So the employment task force that I mentioned has been made up of incredibly skilled, talented, and dedicated volunteers over the years, and one of them being retired public servant and most recently Chief Commissioner of the Canadian Human Rights Commission when she retired, Mary Gisela, who had 36 years of public service behind her. You will hear from her in a moment, but with her experience and knowledge, and with our realization that we now needed to put some focus on the largest employer in Ottawa, the Canadian Public Service, the roots of the Inclusion Employment Initiative were planted in 2014. Jumping ahead to today, as of this week, we have supported 142 people, more coming next week as well, to secure jobs in the federal public service, and 12 of these are now indeterminate or permanent employees.
Fantastic. I'm looking forward. So soon I can stop saying over 100. I'll be able to say over 150. I can't wait. So if we can bring Mary on screen. Thank you. Okay, question for you. Tell us about your initial involvement with Live Work Play as a member of the Employment Task Force and how that evolved to the formation of the Federal Employment Strategy Group.
Well, thank you, Keenan, and hello, everybody. Well, as both Keenan and Anna have noted, I retired from the Federal Public Service after 36 years, and I had mostly been in strategic and policy roles over the years. So when I retired, I wanted to volunteer, and I wanted to volunteer where I could contribute to actually seeing tangible results, and tangible results for real people. That was important to me. So I became a volunteer member of the Employment Task Force, as was mentioned, and we mostly looked for jobs in the private sector. I have to say that it was exhilarating. Every time we were able to find a willing employer and and then matching them to the skills of one of our job seekers, I found it terrific. And so I asked myself the question, not surprisingly, why is it that in the Federal Public Service, we have not been able to hire people with intellectual disabilities over the years? I had never seen one, really. I thought I had at one point, but the individual turned out to have cerebral palsy and did not have an intellectual disability whatsoever. So as Canada's largest employer, it seemed to me important that we assisted the public service to welcome people with disabilities into its workplaces. So in 2015, we began the journey, really an incredible journey since that time. The initial phase of the journey really focused on finding out, identifying, understanding the many visible and invisible barriers to public service employment that were currently excluding those with intellectual disabilities and with autism. The foundational work that we did was entirely grassroots work, working with interested hiring managers and using their teams. And what we called it at the time, I think, was something like learning through hiring. And that's exactly what we did. We took this approach and we channeled all of the learning that we got from each and every one of those hires and from the management and from the teams around them, channeled that learning to design and test a quite customized model or approach for the public service to hire and to retain people. So you asked a little bit about the Federal Employment Strategy Group. That's a group that I chair, and how it came about was that as Live, Work, Play collaborated with individual managers and human resource practitioners, it became very clear that sharing knowledge and sharing experience across departments was absolutely essential if we were to see change. So the Federal Employment Strategy Group thus was born by a simple urge to share. And I call this a kind of a coalition of the willing. This group continues to meet quarterly via MS Teams, of course, now. It's an entirely voluntary group. They are what I think of as the emerging leaders in accessibility, and they exchange experiences and challenges and successes. They learn from each other. They exchange best practices, and even they see new hires every quarter are presented. So that's kind of the beginnings of the journey that we went on together.
Wonderful. So you had mentioned building a model. Maybe you could briefly touch on what is the model, how do we build it, and I guess especially how do we know it's working?
Well, that's a great question. So when I mentioned the model, and I mentioned that we started with the identification and understanding about the barriers to employment, we used that as a starting point. And how it happened was that the process started by making a series of presentations. They were very similar, in fact, to the presentations that we made to the private sector employers through the Employment Task Force. But these were more directed to public service managers, human resources practitioners, and anyone basically who was interested. We would come along and make a presentation to their team. And what we of course realized is that the public service culture is unique, and it has a unique employment structure as well, and that it was therefore going to require a customized approach that recognized its own needs. And how we figured that one out was through the questions that the groups raised with us. They asked a variety of questions, but things like, where do we find these potential candidates? They didn't know of any in the inventories. Well, there really weren't any in the inventories. How do we know a person will have the skills for the duties that I need performed? How do we assess those skills? How do we train an individual that we would bring into our team? How do we know whether the team is going to be able to work effectively with them? And most of all, what do we do if problems arise? Now, there were many, many questions, but what this told us was that there were barriers. Some of them were visible, some of them were invisible. And so we took all this information back and we designed the employment supports model. For each and every barrier, a solution was designed. And then we embedded it in the model. And that's the employment supports model for the public service. And we developed an underlying set of tools as well for the model. And the goal was maximizing the potential of every single employee, their supervisor, and their organization. That's what we called our win-win-win approach. Now that model, you asked me the question about whether we'd seen any success. To date, as Anna mentioned, 142 people with intellectual disabilities and with autism in over 35 departments and agencies. And of these, 12 have become indeterminate, indicating that they have successfully performed their duties over a period of time, leading their managers to put them forward as permanent employees of the public service. So that's the story of the model, and that's the result of the model. Keenan?
Wonderful. That's very clear. Let's bring Elizabeth on screen and continue.
Hello, thank you very much for having me today, everybody.
Thank you for being here. Okay, although dark. So Elizabeth, before your experience with the Live Work Play Employment Initiative at ISED, what had been your experience with the recruitment and hiring of this population, and what has your experience been like since?
Right, so I would say since we started working with Live Work Play, my knowledge understanding has expanded immensely, and it has improved immensely in a positive way as well. Prior to working with Live Work Play, recruitment of persons with disabilities, it was always an option. However, did I, working in HR and hiring managers alike, I would say we know how to recruit way more effectively now that we've worked with Live Work Play than before. There were always job candidates always had the opportunity to self-declare as a person with disability, and we used standard wording in our job posters saying that we encourage applicants to self-declare and that we want to be representative of the Canadian public we serve. When it came to student hiring, for instance, we had an inventory of students who had self-declared as a person with a disability. But I know for a fact there was way more talented population out there that we weren't tapping into. So since working with Live Work Play, so many positive things have happened. For myself being in HR, for hiring managers, and for our new recruits. When working with Live Work Play, we have the services of a marvelous inclusion specialist who the work they do is just golden, because it's completely understandable for a new employee coming in to have to explain to their manager, you know, what accommodations they may need. It's a little bit they need to get to know their hiring manager first. And while the spirit of the public service, our word is that we're here to help you achieve success. We don't need to know what your disability is. All we need to know is what measures are needed to help you succeed. But of course, I'm sure sometimes this isn't a culture that changes overnight. And I'm sure employees coming in the trust needs to be built. So what's wonderful is the inclusion specialist helps build that relationship of trust. So if ever an employee comes in and maybe they're not fully comfortable, you know, saying to their manager straight off the bat what it is they need, they can share it with the inclusion specialist, and the inclusion specialist in turn talks with the hiring manager. So that, and in addition to the support that Live Work Play gives to hiring managers and employees alike, we've seen hiring managers have so much more confidence when they hire, because sometimes they wonder, am I qualified to effectively manage this employee? I'm nervous if I'm going to be able to help them to succeed. And what Live Work Play helped us understand is they said some people think the golden formula is you need extensive education or extensive training working with people with a variety of disabilities. And the words of wisdom we got from Live Work Play were, you know, that's not necessarily the golden formula. In our experience, the golden formula for a wonderful hiring manager is one who is open-minded, adaptable, and engaged, committed to helping their new employee achieve success. So those words have been so comforting and inspiring. And I would just say that working with Live Work Play specifically has given us, the federal public service, so much more confidence in what we're doing. And it's helped immensely. We were working with very limited knowledge, very limited understanding. Now we feel way more intermediate and comfortable, and it's just been excellent. So thank you.
Thank you. And that addresses a little bit. I was going to ask you a follow-up because I know for Live Work Play, one of our first concerns going into this back in 2015 was, well, that's a pretty complex workplace. There's all these different departments. There's variables like HR policies, practices, recruitment, accommodation centers, contracting, unions. So what has been your experience with diversity in hiring in this context?
Great question. And my answer is actually positive and maybe not what we were expecting. I would say that, in fact, the nuances of the public service, for instance, I'll take the Public Service Employment Act, the law that governs hiring in the federal public service. That has been so positive in the sense that the staffing values in the federal public service are fairness, access, transparency, and representativeness. So actually, our guiding values are facilitating, are really, they're facilitating effective outreach to communities. And I'll say the unions, for instance, while some people might worry that they can be a hindrance, I would call unions actually an ally. They are very enthusiastic. They represent the way unions work, depending on the professional occupational group in which you're working. So for example, administrative services, they have a certain union, PSAC. If you're hired into the economist professional stream, that's another union called CAPE, but every union is unanimous in that they are there for their employees, and we always consult anytime we're doing a particular recruitment strategy. And as you know, it's one of our strategies is to increase representation of persons with disabilities in the public service. So the unions always would like a heads up when we're taking on a certain recruitment strategy. And all we have heard from the unions when we've informed them is nothing but enthusiasm and asking how they can support more. And they're just excited to have more members whom they can support. So I would say a lot of our nuances, they're only helping and improving the recruitment process as opposed to getting in our way, because we have, we're audited on, are your hiring practices fair? Are you giving fair access? Are you being transparent to help transparency if ever, maybe a recruit doesn't happen? Are we fair and forthright with why it didn't happen? And if they check on us, how's your representation doing? And we are also subject to an Employment Equity Act, a law. So it's not just, the government of Canada can't just take on the approach of, oh, it would be nice to have a diverse or representative workforce. No, it is the law to have such a workforce in the federal public service. So only helpful beyond anything else. So thank you.
Wow, that is a brilliant answer and could be a whole conference in itself. Great to hear. So if we could have Rosemary on screen. Are you there, Rosemary? Okay, she's arriving. Thank you so much. And if you can unmute as well. Okay. Okay, so a bit of an open-ended question for you to start. Just tell us a bit about yourself and your experience with the labor market prior to your public service employment.
Well, I previously worked as a sales associate in retail clothing store. That was my very first experience in the workforce at the age of 17 after high school. Unfortunately, I didn't last very long. The pace was slow, but it was required to stand for long hours. I lost that job after just 2 weeks because the manager didn't understand my needs as an employee and looked for a replacement without even talking to me. After that experience, I came to Live Work Play for employment specifically. They got me a summer job, not in the government, but in administrative stuff at Centertown Citizens Ottawa Corporation. I did a lot of paper filing and scanning in the office. My first government job was in September of 2017 as a test clerk in Public Service Commission.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, let's carry on with that. Tell us more about your time with the public service so far and your career path there.
Well, I worked at PSC as a test clerk for about a year until I was offered a job in my field of graphic design at ISAD in the mental health center in October of 2018. I moved to ISAD, was there for about 3 months until the work shifted and didn't fit in my skills. The next year in 2019, I temporarily worked at Correctional Service Canada, helping them to move locations and files. After, in about November 2019 to April 2021, I worked at CBSA, scheduling meetings and charting inventory of companies. I worked over there over COVID until I got my opportunity to come back to ISAD in my role now as a human resources coordinator, which I started in May 2021. At ISAD, I was an ambassador for the charity campaign that ended just last week, actually. I enjoy the stability that ISAD has given me. I originally was hired as a full-time employee, but mental, physical health came in the way. So, and it was very overwhelming. So now I was able to change my hours to 30 hours. My manager was really understanding and he put my mental health first. I think that it's so important to have a manager that is understanding and wants to see their employees thrive.
That's great. Thank you for that update. And we're going to go back to Anna now. Thank you, Rosemary. All right. So the results we have seen have been direct evidence of strong leadership in the federal government in supporting inclusive employment. And of course, that works side by side with the policy context, such as the many goals and initiatives of the accessibility strategy for the federal public service. Can you tell us about how that fits with our experience?
Yes, of course. During all of our work with the public service and getting to work alongside our wonderful volunteer Mary, I've learned a lot about the policies that exist in our federal government and seen some great things there. So the Accessible Canada Act is one of the things, and it came into force in 2019, and it has as one of its pillars employment, and it outlines as its declared its desired state. Job seekers with disabilities see the Government of Canada as an employer of choice, and that job seekers and public servants with disabilities have access to employment opportunities and can contribute at their full potential. So both looking at, people coming into the public service, but also once they're in, making that as positive an experience as possible. So as a response to the Accessible Canada Act, the Government of Canada launched the Accessibility Strategy for the Public Service of Canada, also known as Nothing Without Us, as the roadmap. So there are 5 main goals, and we have mostly been connected to the goals of improving recruitment, retention, and promotion of persons with disabilities, and also building an accessibility confident public service. So in respect to this building an accessibility confident public service, people with intellectual disabilities often get forgotten about or overlooked when looking at initiatives that are more cross disability. So we do a lot of outreach with the public service to create awareness of the great potential of this population and the success that has been demonstrated with the employment supports model. Another piece of the strategy connected to the recruitment goal that we have had direct involvement over the past 15 months is the federal internship program for Canadians with disabilities. And with that, we have seen great success in having 10 job seekers we support secure a variety of roles in several departments. Some started as early as last April, and then also some all the way to last summer. It's a two-year internship that they're doing. The engagement of the managers and the teams has been great, and it's exciting to see so many people we support truly thrive in these roles as well. So as you mentioned, Keenan, the strong leadership within the public service has been instrumental in the success we have seen in supporting people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons to get jobs in the federal government, but equally as important is the policy side. And it has been great to see the strong progress in this area as well.
Perfect. Okay. Well, so speaking of the policy side, we'll bring back in our expert, Mary. So, Mary, in your distinguished career, you saw the announcement. I don't know how, I'm sure it was hundreds of important policies and strategies. Some move forward, some were less successful. How does the experience of the Live, Work, Play Employment Initiative inform us as to steps that can be taken to deliver on these promises?
Well, thanks, Keenan. That's a big question because we're talking about a fundamental shift in a huge and complex organization. But I'm very hopeful because with the passage of the Accessibility Act and the release of the roadmap, the strategy for the public service, I think the goals that have been set are ones that we can all work together on: improving recruitment, improving retention, and promotion of persons with disabilities, and building, as Anna said, an accessibility confident public service. But I would say that I think we are now at the point where our work is going to be to bridge a huge gap between aspirational legislative and policy objectives and the actual presence in the public service workplaces of those with intellectual disabilities and those with autism. The Live, Work, Play Employment Initiative has demonstrated very clearly that those with intellectual disabilities and with autism can be successfully recruited and become well-performing public service employees using the employment supports model. It was a targeted recruitment program that the employment initiative represents, and it worked. And we have to continue to build on the strengths that we have discovered through this model. I would say a couple of other things. In keeping with the social model of disability, I would say that one of the first steps is a mental step, in the sense that we need to recognize that there is no one size fits all in terms of job recruitment, progression, and retention for people with intellectual disabilities, and in fact for people with any disability. In any change process, of course, we have to set expectations, whether they're targets or they're commitments, and then we have to measure progress against those targets. One of the things that this means is that statistics are going to need to be disaggregated so that subgroups, such as those with intellectual disabilities or autism, who are radically underrepresented, become identified and not lost in the overall representation rates. I really welcome the recent announcement from Statistics Canada about their new project called the Disaggregated Data Action Plan. And I really look forward to working with them as well. The next thing I would say is that leadership is powerful, including the leadership of individual managers, human resource specialists, and deputy ministers. There's so much more we could say about the Inclusive Employment Initiative, that a lot of it is captured in the case study. But one of the things that was so important was the Treasury Board Public Service Commission challenge to deputy ministers to hire people with intellectual disabilities specifically. That leadership is actually demonstrates what is the key ingredient, I think, in organizational change. And the efforts of those who emerged as leaders in the Federal Employment Strategy Group are every bit as important to the initiative as are the deputy ministers, some of whom are really making great efforts to lead their departments in this new world. And it really showed, especially the challenge showed, what happens when the ability that senior leaders have to influence positive action. But I would mention that leadership at all levels is important, and it fosters organizational progress and change. And my final point would be that we are really at the cusp of a really important juncture in this post-pandemic world. The employment scene has changed forever through the pandemic, and some of the changes actually bode very well for persons with intellectual disabilities and autism. And I think we have a unique opportunity now to make all of our workplaces, whether they be private sector or public sector workplaces, more inclusive and more accessible to Canadians with disabilities. That's my final word.
Well summarized, because I know that was a complex question and answer, but I think you did a wonderful job. So let's bring Rosemary back. We'll that was the 30,000 meters view. And let's zoom back in a little bit. And Rosemary, if maybe you could tell us a bit from your perspective, some of the keys to success, and it's worked well for you. How can we make it happen for lots more people?
Well, firstly, I am bilingual, so that helps. More and more employers tend to seek people who are bilingual. It helps in order to go up higher, upscale in the department, because they look more and more for managers and higher up to be bilingual. Also, I went to school for graphic design for about 2 years, and that schooling worked really well in transferable skills and making charts, staying organized, and finding different ways to make teams operate more efficiently. Live Work Play was able to connect me to all the federal government jobs. I think it would have been really difficult to get a job through the online application process. It's very sturdy. Live Work Play was able to utilize my skills in graphic design and be my own person when developing my resume and employee profile. They took my skills and applied it to jobs that I would do well in, and it's been a really good experience. As I developed in my roles in different departments, Live Work Play support has listened each time and tailored to their support to me. Now I use Kelly, their support as needed, and more to check in around mental health, keeping them updated, and if there are any issues or changes that happens in the workplace.
Perfect. Thanks so much. We still have some time, so perfect. I'm going to bring back Elizabeth, please. Thank you. So the senior leadership at ISED has shown a deep commitment to identifying and addressing representation gaps for people with disabilities. Can you tell us a bit more about some next steps in reducing the gap and how this type of partnership can support that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Keaton. So good news all around. We have what the future looks like in terms of recruitment of persons with disabilities. It looks very positive. With the coming into force of the Accessible Canada Act, the entire public service has committed to hiring at least 5,000 employees who self-declare as a person with a disability by the year 2025. Also, the definition of a disability has in recent years expanded significantly. So people who may not have previously self-declared as a PWD now will and fall under the definition. So, and in terms of how Live Work Play will bring us to this end goal that where we'd like to get to by 2025 and beyond, Live Work Play will continue to be a talent pipeline that ISED, as well as other federal public service departments, will tap into for their talent, because it has a marvelous reputation. We've heard nothing but glowing feedback from all of the hiring managers who have tapped into it, and we continue to get inspiration. Even parents of there are some public servants who are parents of Live Work Play members, or in future will be Live Work Play members, and they inspire us by doing talks at various government departments. Conferences like the ones we're having, like the one we're having today, are becoming more and more frequent and commonplace. And there's lots of training. I'm seeing a lot of evolution at ISED, for instance, late 2021, late 2020, we launched the Workplace Accommodation Center, whereby there's a central place where employees and hiring managers can order any adaptive technology needed for employees. So it's just, we're seeing so many new services, initiatives, helping facilitate, helping to educate hiring managers. And Live, Work, Play is just going to be, it already is, I would say, the talent pipeline that is our go-to for hiring from the PWD community. And it's through our regular meetings, the Federal Employment Strategy group, where there's representatives from each federal government department. I just find the news keeps getting better and better at every meeting that happens, I believe, either every 6 months or about every 6 months. The numbers are just getting higher and more good news stories are being shared. So we consider it a wonderful talent pipeline that we'll continue to tap into. And we're doing another recruitment drive, if you will, at ISED. We're doing another round of we're going to promote Live, Work, Play again to the senior management tables. So good times ahead.
Wow, that's a lot of positive pressure, but we love it. Okay, we have actually time to answer a couple of questions. So this would be best for Anna, and you can probably also answer about the frequency of the FESG meetings. I think that's changed as well. But also the question is regarding a very alert person. So yes, Live, Work, Play is an Ottawa-based charity. The Federal Public Service is all of Canada. So how are we navigating that?
Great. So Federal Employment Strategy Group, yes, we meet quarterly. At one point it was every 6 months. Now it's quarterly. So that's been great. And it is now virtual as well. So a really wonderful group. And we're meeting next Wednesday is our next meeting. So about outside of Ottawa. So what do we do? It's a great question. So over the past many years, we have supported the connections of jobs in the federal public service to other like-minded organizations across Canada, including hires in Newfoundland and Labrador, in Mississauga, Ontario, and in Burnaby, BC. But last spring, we announced the formalization of what we call the Canadian Network Supporting Inclusive Public Service Employment. It is a mouthful, and it's an important step for ensuring that the work of the Federal Employment Strategy Group for the hiring of people with intellectual disabilities and autistic persons is truly national. So when a department is looking to hire someone outside of the National Capital Region, we at Live, Work, Play are still based there and still do our work there. But instead we support the connection to the partner organization in their area and share our processes and learnings with those partner organizations, all of whom have had great success in the private sector. But as we know, and as we've talked about today, the public service has a very unique culture and employment structure that requires a unique, customized approach to its needs. So sharing our employment supports model and its tool is a big part, and all the tools involved is a big part of this network.
Excellent. And I think we have time. I'll bring Mary. Maybe this might be our last question, or yeah, Mary or Anna. But so we couldn't go into great detail about the employment supports model because that would be a whole presentation. But I guess maybe some of the highlights or key innovations of that model that has made it work effectively.
Anna, why don't you take this, because you work with the model on a daily basis.
Sounds good. Wonderful. So yes, Mary was there, her and my previous colleague Jen Susie were the ones to develop it, and Mary and I talk about this, I would say, many times a week, but I'm happy to go to just a few of the key components, I would say. So 3 of the main ones would be workplace assessment that we do. This is really the idea of our inclusion specialists getting out and really understanding a workplace, finding out the duties. That's sort of one of the main things of having the manager define what the duties are that they're looking for. What is the person going to need to complete on a daily basis, on a weekly basis? So what are the main components there, and breaking that down? And the skills required to do the job, either that would need to be in place already or be able to learn. In addition, that workplace assessment looks at things like the work environment. So previously, this was the the inclusion specialist going on site and really get an idea, is it noisy here? Is it quiet? Is it busy? What's the pace of work? Those kinds of things. And now more and more, there's also questions about, working from home. Where is the person going to be working? Or is it a mix? Or what's that? And then finding out about the culture of the team, how they normally communicate, all those kinds of things. So we can have a really robust idea as to what is going to be a good fit. As Mary always says, the magic is in the match. And that's one of our key pieces, is that workplace assessment, so we can have a strong understanding. And I'd say, I realize we're getting tight on time, but one of the other main things that we do is a training plan that's customized to the person. So this is really about, it's not about training in general about disability or anything like that. It really is about what, understanding how they would train anybody coming on board to that team. And then from there, customizing it and seeing, does something need to be changed a little bit? Would we break that standard operating procedure down into some different checklists or task lists? Or would we add some visuals or some screenshots? Or what would we do to make this work for that particular employee, which is going to look different from a different person if they were going to get onboarded? So really customizing it. And then in turn, not doing training about disability or diagnoses, but instead around how that particular person that has taken the job, how they learn, how they like to communicate, how they are going to thrive in the workplace. So that's a very quick snapshot, but I recognize the time, but those are some of the highlights. And then I'd say the last piece is ongoing support. So we don't disappear. We're there to regularly check in, see how things are going. We may become more involved for a little bit, and then maybe become less involved because things are going great. And then maybe a pandemic hits and we're more involved again for a while. You never know. So we're ongoing and recognized for that piece as well.
Great. Well, maybe next year a whole presentation on the model. But there is a last question. I do want to find the time for it. It's for Elizabeth, and it's really important, so I want to make sure we answer it. So I'm currently working with autistic youth who are concerned about disclosing being autistic in regards to employment. So basically advice around disclosure, if Elizabeth is available. Oh, there
Yes,
she is.
certainly. Thanks, Keenan. Great question and completely understandable. What would be the best way to word how in government, the way we train our hiring managers is it is ingrained in them that the spirit of this organization is to help everyone succeed. We have a responsibility to accommodate all of our employees regardless of their needs. And how shall I say, when I've seen reticence to, and I will highlight something very important, that never is a person with a disability required to share what their disability is. If they want to keep that private, they may always do so. All we need to know is what they need to be, what accommodations they need. And I would say that unfortunately, we have seen a case or two where an employee was willing to self-declare that they had a disability, but said, oh, no, I don't think I need any accommodations. I think I'm good. And then as time progressed, it became clear for them that they did need accommodations, didn't come forward. And sadly, unfortunately, then the manager was left to say, well, then these are my expectations. Something's in the way here, but I'm not being told. So I'm at a loss of what to do. I would say that it is a safe space in the federal public service to indicate what your accommodations are. We are not an employer that will discriminate And if ever something like that were to take place, we are audited, and there is zero tolerance for if a manager is not meeting, we have a duty to accommodate by law. So my words of encouragement would be, as nervous or as anxious as it may make you, you are doing the right thing by just being clear what it is you need, and guaranteed we've probably given similar accommodations to employees in the past. So I understand how it can be a little intimidating, but please tell us what you need. We want you to succeed, and we can't do that if we don't know what accommodations we need to provide you with. So that would be my words of encouragement. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. What a fantastic panel we've had today. I just want to thank Anna, Mary, Elizabeth, and Rosemarie for being here, and to everyone who attended. And I think we're just a couple of minutes away where this morphs into the networking session. And as I understand it, we just stay here and then it happens. So it's been absolutely an amazing journey to this point. If you have more questions and you can't attend the networking session, or you'd like to ask differently, we are always ready to discuss. And you may even wish to, if you are involved with the Federal Public Service, you might wish to look into the Federal Employment Strategy Group, and you can ask Anna about that, anna@liveworkplay.ca, and as well as for other questions. And it's an easy email, but I will also type it into the chat. So thank you for your questions. Thank you for being here. Thank you to our panelists, and what an amazing conference. Now we'll just wait for the networking to begin. I got that right? It's in like 2 minutes.
I think people could take a bio break.
Good idea.
Want, but we've scheduled this really tight, so please, if you can't join the networking session again till 2:10 or something like that, it's not a problem. I want to thank Keenan, the whole group. We knew at Disability and Work Canada when we first saw this proposal for our conference that this would be a rich, deep, really informative, I think really inspiring session, and that is what it has been. I really like the way, Keenan, that you've grouped folks at the front line, somebody in HR, a public sector leader, and someone who's benefited from this initiative and has proven what we've always said, which is that people have tremendous capability to contribute to our workplace and to our society. If only we can find a confident workplace, an inclusive workplace, and match that person up to the right situation. And that is what you've done here. So I'm sure there's quite a journey to come in the federal public service. 5,000 is a really big number. I think all Canadians are watching this as an example, and also as a learning experience. So I wish you the very, very best as you continue with this journey. And I think what we'll do is we'll get started on the networking. But if someone, take a break, come back in 5 minutes, there'll probably be people joining us along the way from other sessions. If you'd like to join another networking session or just take a break, by all means, people can leave now or leave and come back, or whatever you might wish to do. And here's how the networking session is going to go. It's an open discussion. It doesn't have to be just about the session that you just attended on the federal public service, although it can be. And of course, we're hoping that everybody from that session stays to participate in the discussion. In fact, folks from the federal session, you can ask questions, you can raise issues. You don't have to just wait and see if someone asks you a question. You have perfect freedom to participate or not. You can stay in the background and watch and listen, or raise your hand or put a message in the chat. And then what we'll do is we'll give you your audio and your chance to ask a question or make a comment. I would ask everybody that since it's only a 20-minute session that goes till 2:25, try to keep your remarks reasonably tight so that we have a maximum number of people who can participate. And at that, let's see if folks have some issues. I'm going to check the chat right now. just to see if anything's in there now. This is some advice, and looks like no questions quite yet for the networking session. Yeah. So anyone who wants to ask something, I think now can I unmute Gail Kessler? And maybe give us a little bit, if you want, give us a bit of information about your organization or anything you want to say about yourself in terms of what you're working on, or not, as you wish.
Hi, so I'm Gail Kessler. I'm a project manager with Autism CanTech. And Autism CanTech is a new national program that was launched in March, where we train autistic individuals in digital and tech sector skills, as well as employability skills. And we offer a paid work integrated learning experience. And I guess my question would be, is how do we connect some of our participants across the country into some of these federal hiring practices, whether it be for our work integrated learning experience or for actual connecting to full-time employment?
I can jump in.
Yep.
Great. Hi, Gail. Nice to meet you. Yeah, feel free. We can connect after, but probably the best thing, if they're in the Ottawa area, it would be coming through us, Live, Work, Play. And for other parts, I can connect you to who our partner organizations are, depending on where the job seeker would be. I can connect you to those service providers there. But if we have the chance after, maybe later today or next week, I'd be happy to go through that process with you. Each organization, each province, of course, has different ways that they're funded and different things, as I'm sure you're well aware. But I'm happy to, at minimum, make those connections for you.
Wonderful. Thanks, Anna.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much, Anna. And absolutely, people on the panel, just step in just as Anna just did. You don't need to wait around to be identified. I can't see all the hands, so if Nav can be monitoring the hands, I'm not monitoring the chat, but this is your chance to raise any issue you want if you're out there, and please be confident. In your question, every question we've had in these discussion sessions has been incredibly valuable and helps advance our conversation.
If we're waiting, because I see some people. Oh, good. I see Basil has his hand up. Sorry, be quiet now.
Okay,
Hi, should I just go ahead?
go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Basil. I'm a researcher at the Institute for Work and Health, and I'm also someone with both learning disabilities and physical disabilities. And my question is, with federal job processes and hiring, how can we improve transparency for applicants? Not to be self-centered, but I, have applied to these positions and seen these hiring calls for people with disabilities and been in the process, and you never sort of know, even if you're in phase 1 or phase 2, how many phases there are.
Could you would that be Elizabeth or?
Sure, I can answer that. So thanks, Basil, for the question. It basically, because there are so many different selection processes going on at all times, it is what we try to do, and we try not to keep the job posters too long. Sometimes what we do is we start with, please apply and outline how you meet education and experience. So at least step by step, we try to remain transparent. So once we have candidates who are retained after meeting education and experience, we'll, communicate by email to say you are now invited to the next phase of the process, which will include a skill test, let's say. And then when someone arrives at the skill test, we might indicate that should you be successful, you will be invited to an interview followed by a reference check. Some posters might, depending on how the poster is crafted and what strategy is being used, some job posters might say at the forefront, step 1, 2, 3, 4. I would say as a general rule, the way a process always runs with some variation we collect applications, screen against education and experience, and maybe some operational requirements. If, for instance, you must be willing to work overtime, that's just an example. There's a screening on those elements. Then sometimes there's an exam as well as an interview. Sometimes it's just an interview and reference checks. I would say those are kind of the staple assessment steps. Some might be a 3-step assessment. Others, you might have a 4 and 5 assessment phase. Also, if the opportunity is bilingual imperative, there's second language testing, which adds a step as well. But generally, assessment for a selection process, you're looking at some combination of screening, exam, interview, reference check, I would say. Hope that helps. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
I could add that we thought of some questions for each of the sessions, so I'll put out our question that might help spark some discussion as well. And partly because this one was coming right after the federal one, we assumed that the federal one would have a significant degree of training, information, and support, both to the employees in the federal public service and also the managers. So the question that we thought of was, how can an employer foster an inclusive workplace culture for persons with disabilities? I mean, what an enormous question. But now you've had this big experience. Specifically, what kind of training and information is most important for managers and for employees? So both those attending the session and also the panel, if anyone's got comments along those lines, I'm not sure we really got a clear idea in the federal public service what was done inside to promote this to the other employees, to promote it to the unions, to, basically the partners in the workplace, and of course to managers. Was there something systematic to that, et cetera? I don't know if that's Keenan or Anna or Mary.
You go, Mary.
All right, I'm going to just answer part of that because of course, I don't have up-to-date information in terms of how the exact steps that are being taken now, as Elizabeth does and has outlined for you. But in terms of the project, we relied on what we kind of thought of as a networking approach, just like the employment task force that was Live, Work, Play was already engaged with in terms of its private sector job seeking for its members. We used a similar approach. I probably did 175 to 200 presentations to various places, everything from management committees at the highest level through to just a group of people who were kind of interested in the subject at one point and just said and so we would go and we would just talk to people. It was kind of it was a very human approach in the sense that anybody who was interested, we were interested in. And so we did these presentations. Of course, since the pandemic, we've been doing them online, and more we are finding that there are, one of the things that exists in the federal public service is disability champions. We worked a lot with disability champions to inform them of the employment initiative, and they in turn put us on to people. So it's kind of each one reach one. We always say when we do a presentation and we present the model and so on, we always say, if you know of anybody, who might have an interest in this, just call us and we'll do you a presentation. So as I say, it's nothing fancier than that. We started with those interviews that I talked about where we got all those questions that indicated where the barriers were. We took the barriers, figured out solutions. We took it back to the users and worked on it from there. So that, I guess, is one thing I would say. The other thing I would say is that one of the barriers was this inclusion. How do you achieve inclusion in the workplace? And early on, we had a workshop developed within Live, Work, Play that looked at how the person going into the team and how the rest of the team could could work more effectively based on the person's disability. Well, we actually rethought that very thoroughly from the point of view of the neuroscience and what it is that inclusion really means. And it's not about disability at all. Inclusion is about feeling part of something. And so we developed a new workshop called the Inclusion Workshop, which is offered at a very, very low cost. And again, it actually focuses on the kinds of practical strategies that at a workplace could use to make sure that everybody feels that they can contribute their best. And as we know from the neuroscience, when people feel, not necessarily are, but feel that they're not being treated in a way that is inclusive, it actually has an effect on their brain functioning and on their ability to contribute in the future. So the workshop is really good that way. It's very interactive, and it actually helps. It's good for team building, and it helps people develop really practical strategies on the ground for what they can do in their workplace to ensure that they're living up to the motto that if you don't plan to include, then you are accidentally excluding people. So again, I'll stop on that note, but it seems to me that the Inclusion Workshop is, I think, at least addresses part of that issue of how you affect change in the workplace.
So I'll turn to, given the time here, I'll turn to a couple of the questions that have come forward. This next one's really interesting. I'm not sure, it might be for Elizabeth, but you guys can determine. Is anyone tracking employee retention for those living with IDDs and or autism who are hired on as federal employees? Or does anyone have any insight on employee retention in this regard? I know you've spoken, Mary spoke about it, the data system. Anybody who can answer that's so vital. And we've often lacked relevant data in the past inside a lot of organizations. I can speak to that in terms of the Ontario Public Service, just as an example. We've improved our data a lot.
Sure, I can take a stab at that one, Alec. I can tell you, we do a lot of employee surveys, perhaps where that could be a challenge in measuring how well we're retaining employees with intellectual disabilities in particular. That I will say, we tend to measure only persons with disabilities because we don't currently have a, sorry, and I'm saying this just for ISED, it's possible that other federal government departments do it differently, but so far, all of the reporting and tracking we do, we stop at once an employee self-identifies as a person with a disability. Will we get to a place where we dig deeper and we measure more specifically persons with intellectual disabilities? I would see us getting there in future. I can't say how soon. The reason being is just because we've recently more and more employees are self-identifying as a person with a disability, and namely intellectual disabilities. I think we need to change the way we measure data and do analysis on this front. Currently, we're maybe a little behind on the 8 ball in that we look at PWDs as a community as a whole, but that's as far as we go. I think, though, in future, we'll be able to measure that, what was just asked.
So the next question is really interesting, and I think it fits so well with the conversation we had earlier. This is from Catherine Hesson-Bolton. Based on the review process with a focus on education and experience, how would you advise post-secondary students to bring in their extracurricular activities, self-directed learning, and projects? Secondly, how are micro-credentials being measured within the review process? And I was so impressed by the really, really interesting comment by Rosemarie, and I think also by Mary, that you weren't just having a formalized recruitment process, let's call it that. You were looking at what the person's true profile of what they had to offer was, and you were digging deeper to find it. So I think there'll be a lot of people in this session interested in learning a little bit more about how you did that. I'm not really sure who should be responding on this.
Anna announced that she had to leave just when this really difficult question comes along. I would, so in a general way, so we have discovery specialists on our team, and their job is to take into account everything that was just mentioned. So we, some years ago, moved away from, unfortunately, in the employment supports world, there are some formal assessment processes that really don't tend to help people very much. It just gives like scores and things and doesn't give you good information. So we moved to a discovery process of getting to know people, which brings all of that information to bear. And then that goes into the matching process that others have discussed. And for example, this can go into a federal employment strategy group session where you're discussing a candidate and you're doing so in a way that goes well beyond a resume and brings to bear all the gifts, talents, and experience of the person. So I think overall we've adopted that strategy in our employment supports, and it's just a bit more specialized as regards federal public service. But the advantage being, you know, we have people like Elizabeth and others who can really help us tunnel down to what, you know, what makes a good candidate for this position or that position, and develop a really good match. So I don't think that it precisely addresses, but that is the overall approach that we have taken that I think helps bring as much information. Oh, good, Elizabeth's here.
Yeah. No, thank you, Keenan. That's great. Ways to demonstrate, I was thinking about this. So a micro-credentialed, meaning perhaps you've taken certain courses or workshops, and maybe that you have a certification saying that you've worked on your analytical thinking competency. I'll just use that as an example. Where you have opportunity to highlight that, there's a good news from our side as hiring managers. The message is loud and clear, and I would say I've been in government HR for 17 years, and this message is truer now than ever. Hiring managers know now, not every candidate needs to be assessed the same way. What I mean by that is, let's say you run a selection process. We used to have our rating guide where we had our standard exam questions and our interview questions, each question designed to measure a merit criterion. So let's say we were measuring adaptability. Well, the only chance you are going to get to demonstrate that you have that competency is when you answer this interview question that we have prefabricated. Now it's way more open-minded, whereby if you have 4 candidates in a selection process, maybe 2 candidates are going to go through the interview, but maybe your second 2 are going to be able to provide something such as their certificate from their course, that now speaks to the fact that they've acquired that competency. Another great opportunity is speaking with the inclusion specialist. For instance, whenever we hire someone from Live, Work, Play, we reach out to the inclusion specialist to say, here's the job, here are the competencies needed. Who do you currently have? Which members do you see maybe being a potential match here? So make your micro credentials very clear to the inclusion specialist, and managers, and just be forthright about it. The worst that can happen is if you say, I have this micro credential, can you accept this as to demonstrate that I meet this merit criteria? Most managers will be very open-minded. If ever they felt they needed to do a little more evaluation, they would say so, but in fact, they would appreciate you being forthright. So ask the hiring manager, and make sure that you're keeping your professional profile nice and up to date with the inclusion specialist as well, because there's many opportunities. Yeah. Thank you.
So on that note, I want to thank everybody, both from the panel who stayed on and also all the participants. This was a really great discussion, and we'll carry it on through the rest of the conference. Thanks a lot.